My name is Chris Hiller. I'm a developer advocate for IBM. I work primarily in Node.js and related technologies, and I'm here to do kind of a deep dive into Node-RED, which is a flow-based programming environment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can use Node-RED and Watson and the Box collaboration tools, so kind of an enterprise Dropbox type tool. What we're going to do is we're going to download documents from Box, and we're going to analyze them, run them through Watson's natural language understanding service, and use that information coming out of Watson to tag those documents automatically using Box. So I'm using Box because the API was available, but you can imagine something similar if you're maybe storing documents in Domino. So first off, a little bit about Box. So Box is an enterprise-grade collaboration, storage, and workflow automation solution. So they started kind of in the same space as Dropbox, where anybody can just log in there and store their files in the cloud and share files and collaborate. But then they kind of pivoted a bit and are now focused on the enterprise. IBM is a big client of theirs. We use Box at IBM. But if you use one of these things, and you have a lot of people using it, and a lot of documents are getting uploaded into the cloud, organization and searching can become an issue. And I think a quick win to improve searchability of documents and improve organization is by tagging them. And you can't really expect your users to go and you know, Joe user goes in and makes a document and maybe some Word doc about some proposal. You can't expect them to manually go into the interface on box.com and tag their stuff. It's just too much overhead. But what we can do is automate that. And we can do that with Watson Natural Language Services and Red. So Watson Natural Language Understanding. This service can derive these tags from text. So you give it a bunch of text, it analyzes the text, it gives you something you can make tags out of. And so we'll automate it. First, we're going to connect Box to Watson with Node-RED. Then we'll take the documents that we found on Box, and we're going to analyze them with Watson NLU. And then we're going to go back to Box with the tags that we've gotten out of Watson and tag the files that we did. So this portion will be me messing around in Node-RED. And let's start. So how do I do this? Mirror is what I want, I believe. All right, so I'm going to assume everybody can read the text on these things. Okay, in the back. Should be larger. Okay, I'll make it a little bigger. I'll try to make it a little bigger. Let's see. View, zoom in. There we go. A little bigger. All right. So this is Node-RED. I'm not going to. Yesterday I kind of did an intro to Node-RED, so I'm going to assume that either you've seen this before or you'll be able to pick it up real quick. But let me grab my notes here. So the first thing we need to do if we want to get files out of Box is to log into Box. So I have, let's see, should be logged in here. Okay, so this is Box, their web interface. I've signed up for a developer account with Box. I get like admin console and dev console. But a normal user of Box probably won't see these things. They will, however, have a list of files. I've created a folder called Files to Tag. I've also created a kind of a bot user. Okay, so in my Box account, there's me, Christopher Hiller, but there's also this bot user. I named it Yo-Yo-Dine, and Yo-Yo-Dine will be Node-RED for all intents and purposes. So it's not going to be me as my account going in there and tagging files. It will be Yo-Yo-Dine tagging the files. And there's all sorts of options for authentication with OAuth 2. There's a whole OAuth 2 flow. I set up Node-RED to do an OAuth 2 with JWT JSON web tokens. And that seems to work okay. It's probably appropriate for what we're doing. It's a kind of intent for machine-to-machine OAuth 2. It kind of expects a human there. So we have the credentials already set up because it's tedious to do. Lots of copying and pasting of credentials here into Node-RED. And we've set that up already. So there's a whole bunch of files in here. And these are all just plain text files. I went to textfiles.com and I looked around and I said, okay, I need a bunch of text files, and here they are. And there was a folder called Science, and so I thought, Science, great. And I downloaded all the files in the Science folder, and then I uploaded them to Box. And you can see that if we preview one of these files, they're just kind of random science text files. This particular one, What Are Black Holes, by somebody and somebody else. This one over here. Let's see what file is it? Okay, this one is requirements for becoming an astronaut. So it's all sorts of random text files like this. Now Box also supports Word documents, it supports Google documents, it even supports iWork documents if that's your thing. Either way, we can still do this. It doesn't have to be text files, it's just what I had handy. And so we've got the authentication set up in Node-RED already. I'm not an expert on OAuth 2 or JWT, I can't really speak on that either. But I've went and developed a couple extra box nodes. And so these aren't yet available. If you go and you search an NPM for give me Node-RED nodes that work with Box, you're not going to see these yet. I have to get this stuff merged. I'll send a pull request once I'm happy with them. But I've enabled several different things that you can do with the Box API to help me do this task.
Chris, are you saying that all 5 of those are not available, or
there are there's 3 of these that are available to.
Okay.
The ones that are available already are the Box events, and this is a basically it's streaming in like real-time events, maybe not quite real-time, depending on what you're doing. That exists already. There's a download one that exists, not quite in the same form, and then there's an upload one that exists. The ones that I added were list folder items and set file info. This download node would expect you to have a file name or a file ID, and you would be downloading one file at a time. But I need to get a whole list of files. Everything in that folder didn't exist, I made it. So the description for this talk said something about real time. I'm not going to do that. It's kind of, it gets complicated because there are many different types of events that could occur. So a user might go in there and upload a file, might rename a file. You don't necessarily want to go and reanalyze every file on every event, and I didn't want to sit there and and try to figure out which ones made sense. I just kind of wanted to get it done. So instead of doing this real time, the way I'm going to do it is, the idea is we'll have maybe a job that runs every some odd hours, goes and gets all the files. We could change that so it gets all the files that have changed in the past few hours, and then analyze them and retag them. But right now it's just going to download all these files on demand, more or less, and type them. So what we need to start with, I think, is this box folder items. And I've added some documentation here. So box folder listing node returns a payload containing information about the items in the folder as specified by the folder ID. So every file and every folder, so a folder and a folder has a folder ID, a file has a file ID, but they're both considered items. So when you list everything in a folder, you may get files in folders. So here we have this box credentials set up already. I'm not going to get into that. But what we need is a folder ID. There are ways you could put in a folder name and search, but it was kind of more straightforward to just get a folder ID and pass it in there. So the folder ID is just some numbers. If I'm here, I can look at my URL. The root folder is always folder 0. If I click on the files tag, I can find this ID in my URL. So this is the ID of the folder. This is everything in the list.
Is that a unique ID across the entire box ecosystem or just within your framework?
I believe it's unique to your enterprise. So you can limit this. The default limit set by the API is 25 files or items, as it were. You can specify an offset. This allows you to use the API and do pagination. But just for testing purposes, I want to get the first 5 files. I'm going to say get shared, get list of science files. That's what I'll call this. And so there are about 150 science files, but again, I just want to get 5 of them so we can see what's going on. I'm going to throw a debug node in here just to see what comes out of this. If we look at the info, we'll see that returns a payload. That needs to be more specific, but basically everything, that whole list of files is going to be a payload property of the message. And we'll use message.payload, and to debug that, it'll show up in this debug tree. So we can do something. So I'm going to deploy this. But surprise, nothing happened. Why? Because this particular node, as you can see by this connector to the left, it needs a message to trigger. It's not going to do anything until it gets a message. How do we give it a message? We can give it a message manually with this inject node. And so let's just call this start. And you can, as a user of Node-RED, you can interact with this inject node after it's deployed. So if I click deploy, I click this button, then it'll do the thing, it'll talk to Box, and it'll get this payload. And so in the payload, we get a property, total count 148, so 148 files in there. I'm not sure, what do you call an array in .NET? Is it an array, is it a list?
Yeah, depends on the language you're on, but yeah.
You can use lists, but they wouldn't probably, well, they're different than arrays in substantial ways, but maybe not for your purposes.
Okay, so,
Collection.
right. So this is just a plain JavaScript array. The way it's displayed here, it's split up. That's just for convenience. It's still an array with 148 things in it. It's an array of objects. Each of these objects has all these properties. We can see that one of the properties is the file name. One of the properties is the file ID. There aren't actually any subfolders in there, so we don't need to worry about that. But if we did have subfolders, we might want to filter them out. We don't need to get into that. But. So I have this great big array of file objects. And so I need to figure out what we're going to do with that. So if the point is to go and analyze these files and then send them off to Watson, what I need to do is actually download them. I need their content. If we're working with text files, I mean, it's just a string, right? It's just plain text. But if we're working with a Word document or a Google document, an iWord document, these are not plain text. These are maybe a binary representation or something like that. And you would have difficulty if you just downloaded the raw file and attempted to send that off to Watson. Watson would say, what is this binary blob? I can't do anything with this. Please just give me text. So happily, Box has something called a representation. And with any of these document files, it can extract the text from them and send those off to you. So because we have plain text files, you don't have to worry too much about it, but you know, if you're an enterprise and you're using Box, you're probably not going to work in plain text files, you're probably going to work in Word documents or something like that. And so I need to download all these files. Now the Box download node, which is way down here, so this Box download node lets you download a single file. So you can think of it as every message, because this has a input, every message that it receives, it will download a file. That means if I have one message with an array of 148 items in it, actually, I'm sorry, there's only 5 items in this array because I limited it to 5, but the other one, the whole one will have 148. But say if I have an array of 5 items, I need 5 separate messages to download 5 separate files. And so what we need to do is split this one message into multiple messages. I mentioned yesterday that there's not necessarily a one-to-one relationship between messages coming into a node and messages coming out of a node. So we're going to use something called a split node. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to create many messages from a single message. So that split node, there it is. So split, we'll split message.payload based on the type. So if the payload is a string or a buffer, maybe you want to split on new lines. If it's an object, maybe you want to split on key value pair. But what we have is an array of objects. And we want to basically split using the default fixed length of 1. So that means what it's going to do is it's going to create a message for every item in the array. The problem is, it only works, I'm going to name this for each file. The problem is, if we look at our payload again, that split node expects the payload to be an array, but our payload is an object. So what do? We need to get this entries property of the payload and make that the payload. What we can do is use a change node. A change node basically allows us to fuss with the data and move things around. What we want to do is set message payload to whatever the value of message.payload.entries is. This basically overrides message payload with message payload entries. We lose total count, we lose offset, we lose order, all that stuff. We don't need it. So, get list of science files, set message payload. What's going to come out of here is a payload that is an array. Then we can connect this. I'm going to try to sort this out a little bit more. So we connect this one, which should come out in 5 separate messages. And so I can deploy this, and that's fine. I haven't configured this. That's the right thing. So we do start here. We can see that I have 5 separate messages now. Each message has a payload, which consists of the file object itself. And so the file object has an ID and a name, etc. So that's what we want. So now I can use this to download these files. If I look at the info on this download node, it can accept a file name, but it also accepts a file ID. It's actually much quicker to just give it the ID, otherwise it needs to, because file names are not unique, it needs to somehow search for that file. In a file object, it will have the name, but it'll also have the parent folder, and it can use that parent folder and basically navigate back up to the root and then kind of figure out what file we're talking about. Anyway, if you have a file ID, it's quicker. So it says here in the documentation that the file ID properties is what we want to use. So in the node properties, if something is not required, that means typically an incoming message can fill it out for you. So if I typed a file ID in here, I believe what would happen is any incoming message would just use the file ID that I put in these properties, and it would ignore anything incoming. We don't want to do that. We want the incoming message to determine which file we download. And so back here, if we look at that, we see ID is the property. So what we have to do is use another change node and move the ID property to file ID. And so message payload.id, or set message file ID to message payload ID. And so this will be just say clock ID, file ID. So now this data should be in a format that the box download will accept. The other thing in this box download node is the download as. So this is that representation thing I was talking about. By default, it'll just download the raw file. But if you're trying to analyze the text of the file, you probably don't want the raw file because you probably have a Word document. And so what you need is the textual representation. You can get, go ahead.
In the previous screen, I had file ID as one word. I don't see that anywhere in the, how does that associate with?
So it's basically up to the documentation of each
there
node
it is.
to explain what properties it understands in a message. And that's where you're going to find that information. There's no relationship necessarily between any, there usually is, but there doesn't have to be something on this form and a message property. If there is, it should, the documentation, if it's well written, should say so. So we want our representation. We can get text, which is what we want. Now, our files are text, but I'm just going to use it anyway because that's what anybody else is going to use who wants to do this. You could also generate a PDF from a Word document, for instance. You could get a thumbnail image. It works with image files, but we don't need that stuff. So this is basically what we're doing. We're saying, okay, I'm going to accept whatever incoming file ID is coming from that message, and then I'm going to download it as a text file. And I want to, and so it should, the resulting content is sent to the message payload. So if I look at the message payload as a debug node, we should see the actual file content. I don't want to abuse Box and get them mad at me and turn off my API access. So I think I'm going to throw a delay node in there. And this will rate limit. As far as I remember, they allow 10 requests per second. I'm just going to do like 30 messages per second or something like that. So I'm going to put that rate limiter right in here before we hit box, and so that'll slow things down a little bit. Deploy. out, start it. It's going to get our files. Did I mess this up? Oh, no, okay. I think I probably messed this up. Right, we all messages, 3 messages per second. Okay, so that's fine. It downloaded. The payload, as you can see, is the content of the text files themselves. And so that's great because that we can send right off to Watson and LU. And I've gone and since this is running on IBM Cloud, I've set up Watson and LU. And because Node-RED understands that it's running on IBM Cloud, it should already have credentials to talk to Watson and LU. And so let's analyze. Let's analyze. I found that looking at these text files, the concepts made the most sense. Now it can extract things like proper nouns, and there is a finite list of categories that can throw things in. But I found if we're tagging files, it makes sense to have a very limited set of tags per file, maybe 3 or 4. And concepts seem to make the most sense. Another one to look at is categories. There's actually a spreadsheet available of all the categories that Watson and LU will generate for any given piece of content. But so if we look at this analyze node, it says, okay, we expect something to come in on message payload. We already have that, which means we don't need a change node. Its output happens to be on the features property of the output message. So I'm going to add another rate limiter in here, just to be kind. And so then we are going to ask for the analysis of this content, 5 files that we download. And so this is going to come in the features property, and debug, deploy this, and start it. Once it deploys,
That's the point. So is there an end to the for each, or is can you end the for each someplace and then continue on the rest of your code? Or is that, or everything after for each is going to execute inside the loop?
so
You know what I'm saying? Asking?
right. You kind of want to think of this in terms of concurrency. So when I click start, everything starts. We get a list of science files. That happens in serial. We set the message payload. That happens in serial. For each file, once we hit this splitter, we create a bunch of different messages and send them all at once.
Like threads?
Yeah, you
It
can.
may not be threads, but
It's running a node. It's single threaded, but it's asynchronous. So we create all these messages. They are not in any guaranteed order necessarily, and they get sent off. And so everything after it, it's still, each of these nodes only receives one message, but it receives it many times. So I'm going to click this, and then it's going to get my listing. It'll go and it'll download content like before, then it'll pass it through to Watson and LU, and so we should get some concepts out. So this one has some concepts that relate to dates, but some of these are probably a little better. So American astronauts, American film actors, United States astronaut Hall of Fame inductees, and these are concepts that it's pulled out of these text files. Degree, United States Navy, Kennedy Space Center. And so we're going to use these concepts as the tags. In this debug node, I've only printed the features property of message, but I'm going to print the whole message. And so you can see exactly what is coming out here. Because there's more information in that that's going to be useful to us. Namely, the file ID will still be there, can still use it. Unless we overwrite something explicitly, the message retains its properties. So if we're looking at an entire message, we see that this is the payload, so we have the content still. And we also see that the file ID is still there. Features is the stuff coming out of Watson. And so basically it's taking this object and stuffing more things into it. So with these concepts, in features, concepts array, and what we want is the text property. That's what we're going to use for the tag. We can use a box update file node. And so this is the one of the nodes that I had to add because this didn't exist before. So box set file info. It's again going to, in the documentation, it says it will accept a file ID. We already have the file ID in our messages that we just saw, so that's good. What we need is message.data or message.payload. And so we want to, what this accepts is basically a free-form JavaScript object. If you type it in here, it must be valid JSON. But for any given file, and if you can find this out by looking at Box's API, basically. Any given file, if you get info about that file, it will have a property called tags, and that tags property is an array of strings. And so if we want to set that property in any given file, we can create something that looks like tags, food, car, etc. And so that's valid JSON, so something like that would work. If we have this in our message, we can use it. And that's got to be message.data or message.payload to fallback. So we don't have that. We have this features object, and then that features object is something called concepts. And then there's this an array of objects, and there's this tag property. So or text property, we have to get that stuff out. Again, that's a change node. Will help us do this. And you may find yourself using these change nodes quite a bit. So this will extract the tag text. And so we want to set message.data to. So our message had features, expression. So there's something called JSON ATA, which is, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but it's JSONATA.org. JSON query and transformation language. It's kind of a nifty way to query a JSON document. It looks like a mashup of various different things, like Excel formulas, maybe it looks a little bit like Visual Basic, maybe it looks a bit like CSS selectors, but what it does is it lets you dig into a JSON file and find some particular information. So Node-RED supports this expression language, and what I want to do is I want a features property. In that features property is a concepts array. And the way that you pluck a property out of an array of objects is you do this. And that's just something you would find out if you read the documentation. Unfortunately, there's no easier way to do it. But what that's going to do is it's going to, we have this features property, and there's a concepts array. That array is full of JavaScript objects. Each JavaScript object has a text property. That's what we want. This is supposed to get us. And so we'll stuff that into the data property here. And then we can look and see, well, what does message.data look like? And we'll see if this works. Clear that out, deploy. I blame the Wi-Fi. Anyway, that looks right. There we go. So a lot of these seem to be about astronauts, probably because the ones that start with A have to do with astronauts. I don't know, aerospace. So this is an array of tags. Then we can use this and give it to the box set info node. Did I delete it? I think I did. So we pass it there. And this all looks good. We're just going to get everything here from the message. The only thing that's required by this node is the credentials. So I'm going to deploy it. And so if I'm back here, here's all my files. And I'm going to go, actually, I'm going to increase this limit to 150. So this is going to get everything. It's not going to output any debug information. And I'm going to deploy it. Moment of truth. Click the button. So I would know this is done. I would probably want maybe another debug node or just some sort of status that says, hey, I'm done doing it. But it's gone through quite a few, so.
You got your 3/2 limiter on it, so it's going to take 50 seconds or so,
Sure.
plus Wi-Fi, so 2 hours.
And that Wi-Fi is brutal, huh?
Yes.
So the tags, I believe they actually come down. They don't come down as soon as you reload. I think they come down as some sort of Ajax afterwards. I hope I'm not getting errors. Let me, oh, you know what? I did have, I did screw it up. So, okay, so this change node, it's not message data. We want tags property. We're just sending this like array. And what do we do with this array? It doesn't know. So yeah, that's all this is. Let's try it again. No obvious problems, so it's done. All right. Come on. See those tags. Thank you. So, yeah. Automated tagging. That's going to be right. There's actually a after I'd already decided to do this talk, IBM and Box announced a partnership where they actually have a product that does this, but this is how you can do it. So I was like, oh, okay. Well, so there is some weirdness here. I'm not sure what. Unsupported text. So there's probably some file in
Language.
some other language that doesn't quite get. So yeah, let me PowerPoint. So we learned how to connect Box from within Node Red. We can analyze Box docs using Watson, natural language understanding. And then we can update the tags on files stored in Box from Node Red with the concepts determined by Watson. And so that's neat. IBM has a call for code. The issue is natural disaster preparedness and relief. If you're interested in helping out, check out callforcode.org or hit this URL. Thank you for having me. Here are more links to stuff, including my GitHub and Twitter and my blog and that sort of thing. And my name is Chris Siller. Thanks for having me.
Take a picture of your contact.
I can move that up for a minute. So does Domino, can you do that sort of thing with storing documents in
There's
Domino?
a REST API
Yeah.
for CRUD.
So instead of the box part, I think that somebody is giving a talk about that sort of thing, where you can talk to Domino from Node-RED. Might not be as efficient as using a native Node module, but, which question?
Could be, to me, the obvious question about Watson and stuff like that is why not make a new search engine?
What do you mean?
Well, Google is not that great. Google will, it will find 10 documents that are reasonable, but all the rest, they have no idea if they are any good, because people don't click on them. And Google gets its information on, what do you click on. But if Watson can just go through it and come up with concepts and then answer the questions that you type in. I understand there seems to be a speed issue perhaps, but.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I do know that IBM has started to consume Watson for its own internal searching stuff. How well that works is hard to say. In some contexts, it works really well, but it has a tendency to kind of just pick out keywords from things that aren't really that important in the grand scheme of things. And so this is where something like Google's PageRank would be useful, because it uses PageRank to determine, yes, this document is relevant, but it's also really popular. And so that's important, because these documents, this may have stuff about astronauts, but if you search for astronauts in Google, you don't get these documents. You get something on Wikipedia because it's popular. And I think that's the difference. You need more than just AI. There has to be some other part of the algorithm that determines relevance. For Google, that's PageRank. For using Watson, I don't know what that looks like. I can only speculate.
To explore the comment about performance, so native Node module, is that compiled with C natively for that computer? So let's say create a Node NPM module. You write it in C and compile it?
So with Node, you can run the vast majority of modules in Node are pure JavaScript. You can have something called a native module, which is compiled for whatever platform, whatever version of Node, whatever architecture you're on.
So when you access MongoDB or Domino server, you're doing REST calls anyway to either.
So I think, so since Mongo and Domino both expose HTTP endpoints, you can do it that way. As I understand, there's a native module that's being worked on to talk directly to Domino in a more performant way.
So does that mean that Node app has to be installed on the same physical server? Or can it be remote?
I assume it can be remote. I mean, I think that's just a wire protocol we're talking about. I don't think it needs to be on the same machine, but it does need to be.
So there's still an HTTP then?
I don't think that would be HTTP. I don't know what it would be because I don't really know Domino, but if there's another way to talk to it besides HTTP, that's much more, performant, it's going to do that. Maybe that looks like some sort of TCP socket.
Are there any scalability concerns with something like this? If, say you sign a project tagging 400,000 documents.
Yeah.
Scalability from the standpoint of, okay, you're downloading all the text from all the documents.
Mhm.
Right. That's an issue, of course.
Yeah,
in its-
you're going
in
to want
itself.
to,
And then
yeah.
about the cloud side, those machines are just ready to blow up at any time, right, to whatever size they need. Handle a job.
So you could do it that way. I'm not an expert on what all our cloud offerings look like in terms of scalability, but you can scale them up to whatever you really need. This particular instance of Node-RED is running on some VM with 512 megs of RAM. I just bumped it up from the default 256 because why not? And it made it move faster. So, I mean, you can bump these servers up as large as you need them. If you are processing that many files, you're going to want to take more steps to minimize the amount of traffic and requests that you make. So you definitely add some sort of filter that restricts the number of files that you're downloading, or files that have only changed recently, or maybe we cache content, that sort of thing.
What would be a good use case for Node-RED? See, I'm working in Java server courses, I'm building web business apps, and I hibernate, I'm talking to a database. What's a use case for Node-RED? Would that be like a router between APIs kind of thing?
Node-RED can be used for lots of different things, but it really kind of shines when it has to listen for events and take actions. So in some sort of event-based architecture or messaging architecture, originally it was written to handle messaging from many IoT devices. So if you have buildings for sensors, you have a Node-RED server sitting there talking to, say, some sort of messaging broker, and you could tie those messages to other services, for example.
I have more